We're afraid of what people will think, or we're afraid we're not good enough, or we're afraid we're too much. And so we hold ourselves back. When we do that, we're muting ourselves. And there are too many people that are muting themselves in the world. And I, for so many years, was one of them. I've discovered the power of unmuting myself, of showing up in the world in a way that is joyfully expressed and boldly alive. That's something that has been so important to me as I've discovered how freeing it is to be unmuted, to unmute our body and to unmute our ideas and to unmute our desires, to unmute ourselves in relationships and at work, and to be our own advocates and to ask for what we want and need. The unmuted life is a life that is fully alive and fully expressed and confident and clear. And to me, it's the only way that I know how to live now. I know what it's like to feel confined and stuck and small and silenced. And I also know what it feels like to be expressed and alive and joyful and present and seen. And it's so much better of a life to be unmuted. And that is what I want to bring you into. Are you ready to unmute yourself? Let's make it happen. Happy Unmuted Monday, everybody. So glad that all of you are here today. We've got folks from all over the US. We've got Mary from Kansas City. Let us know where you're joining us from in the comments. Hi, Lisa. Good to have you here. Linda's with us from Green Bay, Wisconsin. Linda, married to a Packers fan. So I've been to Green Bay. It's a fun place. That stadium is an adventure. Brian Passon, my good friend Brian Passon. Good to see you here. Kim from Louisville, Kentucky. Rachel joining us from Baltimore. I know there's some folks that joined us earlier. Jenny from Alabama. We've got Stephanie all the way from Anchorage, Alaska. Sarah from Bethesda, Maryland. Feel free to let us know where you are joining us from today. We're so glad you're here. This is going to be a really life-giving conversation. And one of the things that I love to do on this show, that if you've been with us before, you know this, is that we like to bring in people that think differently, people that offer a different perspective, people that are in some way disruptors. I think one of the things my friend Brian Passon, we've known each other for, I guess, Brian, a decade at this point. We talked about being constructively disruptive, and that's, I think, one of the things that a lot of the people that we bring on the show have in common. Let's see, we've got Susan from Pennsylvania. Deb is here. People are making friends in the chat already. Janine is here. Angelique is here. We've got Angela, Shay, Janelle, Karen, Jill, Nathan, Gloria. So glad all of you are with us. And for those of you that may not know, if it's your first time, I'm Rachel Druckenmiller. I'm your host, and I'm the founder of an organization called Unmuted. And I work with organizations, leaders, and their teams as a keynote speaker and workshop facilitator, helping them to unleash possibilities and hope, to foster a sense of connection and courage and confidence in themselves, so that they can be more fulfilled at work and at home. So to get started, one of the things I want to invite us to do is a quick question. We're going to we're going to have as a ticker here. I want to invite you to share what your favorite form of movement is. We're going to be talking about stress today. We're going to be talking about the upside of stress. We're going to be talking about the joy and perhaps the pain of movement, but how both of those things can be present. And so to start, I thought it would be fun to just invite people to drop in the chat. What's your favorite form of movement to engage in? You can let us know in the chat. I know one of my favorite forms is there's a dance class called Nia that my friend Lola teaches that I first stumbled upon about 7 or 8 years ago. And me 15 years ago would have totally judged it and been like, those people are doing some weird stuff. But the part of me that wanted to connect with myself at a deeper level and experience more freedom in my body decided to pursue it. And it has been something that's been really, really fun. Hiking is something else I love. Seeing yoga in here, dancing to the groove. I love that. Swimming, dancing, yoga, walking, long walks in nature. There's something to be said for moving outdoors. Let's see, walking, playing with my dog, walking, being outdoors. We've got a lot of folks here that love walking, which the nice thing is we can do that most places. Let's see, being outdoors, walking. Yeah, so moving our body, like we are meant to move in some way. We've got CrossFit. The intensity helps me relieve stress, letting go of it. Bicycling, trapeze yoga, walking your dog and dancing with your 6-year-old. Hey, why not? Dancing of all types. O'Brien is like a certified legit dancer and his wife are next level. Ballroom, Latin swing, West Coast swing. So when we think about it, when we think about the opportunity that we have, and as somebody who I know many of you know this, was involved in a car accident, was hit by a pickup truck 3 years ago and fractured my back. I have learned to not take movement for granted in a way that maybe I previously did because of having the loss of it. When you injure your back or fracture your back, you really can't move in many ways at all. And I remember just going through that experience and how difficult that was. And I now connect to movement in a whole new way. So in any case, just wanted to, bring attention to that. My dad's here. Hi, Peanut. Oh my gosh. I love it. That's my nickname for my dad. He was on the show in December. So thanks for dropping those in the chat. I also wanted to mention that the analytics of the show are provided by Peekaboo. And so if you consistently get invited to these shows, that's probably why, because I'm able to run reports and see who comes and who shows up and who comments on things. And I want to make sure they get invited to the next shows. So just wanted to mention that the show is powered by Peekaboo Live, and you can learn more about them there. That is in the ticker. So without further ado, I want to introduce all of you to our guest today. I'm really, really excited. This is someone whose work I have followed for 7 or 8 years, that has been very influential in my own perspective of how I view stress, of how I view resilience, of how I view meaning making, of how I view social connection. So I was beyond thrilled when she agreed to be on the show, because I truly have been such a fan of the work that she does and the way she combines storytelling with science and in a way that's accessible, which I don't think is done as well as it could be a lot of the time. So Kelly McGonigal is a health psychologist who specializes in understanding the mind-body connection. She's the best-selling author of The Willpower Instinct and The Upside of Stress. One of my favorite books, go-to books, like highlighted up, all kinds of things. Her latest book, I love the cover of this too, by the way, The Joy of Movement, explores why physical exercise is a powerful antidote to the modern epidemics of depression, anxiety, and loneliness. Just as a heads up, we are going to do a raffle at the end of the live today. And so if you put hashtag unmuted in the chat, you just have to do it one time. You don't have to do it 20 times. Do it one time, you'll be entered into that raffle. So just a heads up, I'm going to raffle off some copies of her books. You might also know her from her TED Talk, How to Make Stress Your Friend, which is one of the most viewed TED Talks of all time with over 20 million views. Through the Stanford Center for Compassion and Altruism, she helped create Stanford Compassion Cultivation Training, a program now taught around the world that helps individuals strengthen their empathy, compassion, and self-compassion. In January 2020, Oprah Magazine honored her ability to transform scientific data into wisdom by naming McGonigal the first ever O visionary, people whose groundbreaking way of seeing the world means a better future for us all. Amazing, right? Some fun facts. She's also passionate about animal rescue and adoption. I know we've got a lot of animal lovers in this community from past conversations we've had, and is trained as a cat adoption counselor and matchmaker. She's a certified group exercise instructor and has been teaching group exercise for 2 decades, since 2000. Her favorite format is cardio dance. And her identical twin sister is the well-known game designer and futurist Jane McGonigal. So please help me give a warm, unmuted welcome to Kelly McGonigal.
Hi, thank you so much. That was a great intro.
Yeah. You're welcome. There's, so much to say, and I truly, sincerely mean, everything about how influential your work has been on me, and I know anyone that's come across it and dug into it. So thank you for the work that you do.
Oh yeah, and it's so funny hearing you describe me possibly as a disruptor. I thought was so funny, because my whole ethos is like to be as non-disruptive as possible. I want to be a social relief. But the thing that I think is so interesting is, I think of myself as being a pragmatist. I am profoundly pragmatic. If something works, if it helps, I want to embrace it. And so some of the things that if you look at my career and you might think, well, gosh, that was pretty disruptive, like to tell people to stop focusing on how bad stress is for you. Yeah, that was pretty disruptive in the field of psychology. Here's my little disruptor, Donut. Good job, Donut.
Perfect
you made it
timing.
on camera. But for me, it was just super pragmatic, like paying attention to how if you only focus on how harmful stress is, it makes people feel worse. It disempowers them. And a different conversation, a different point of view can help people. So I know we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But
We will. And I think it's something, because especially over the past several years, I mean, people's stress levels have been so elevated. And I think there's in a lot of ways been a lack of that connection to like, what's it all for? Like, please tell me this is not just here to tire me out and exhaust me and drive me further into the ground of despair that I'm, the pit of despair I already feel like I'm in. So I'm curious, we will get to that. And what I'd love to hear first, and this is a question that we like to ask everyone who comes on the show, since we're talking about unmuting yourself, is would love to hear whatever it is that you want to share about an area of your life that you at one point were experiencing doubt, you were holding yourself back, you were muting yourself in some way, and you moved through that, you overcame it, you worked through it, and you were able to go on this journey of becoming unmuted in that area. So you can pick whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we'd love to hear a story.
So I'll share with you a story that I tell my PhD students. So I teach a class at Stanford for graduate students on how to communicate and how to present your work to others. And I share the story of how when I was a third-year graduate student, like all graduate students in my area, we had to go to this thing called personality seminar with all the graduate students and all of the faculty members in our area. And there was a different presenter every week, present their research. And as a group, we were supposed to ask them questions and challenge them and that sort of thing. And like a lot of students, I was silent in those personality seminars, and it was mostly driven by faculty members. So I was TAing for a class that year, and the professor, one day when we were grading exams, said, Kelly, I'm so disappointed that you never say anything in personality seminar. You have such great ideas, and I think you would contribute so much. Why don't you speak up? And so the real reason I didn't speak up was because anytime I had lots of ideas and thoughts, but when I would think about asking a question or making a comment, my heart would start pounding. I'd start to feel like it was an emergency situation. I would rehearse it in my head and start to feel hot. And I didn't like how that felt. It was anxiety. I was very used to avoiding things that make me feel anxious or panicked. And so I would just have these hot flashes of anxiety and panic, ideas that I didn't share, and just sit there in silence. And I was so surprised that this professor thought that I had something to offer. The reason I really like to highlight that is because this is something that I view as my role now, to let people know that their voice matters. But I was so genuinely surprised that she thought I might have something to add. And I actually made a commitment that day that I was going to ask a question or say something in every single personality seminar for the rest of the year, no matter what. I set a rule for myself. And since I knew I had to do it at some point, when that panic arose and my heart was pounding, I had to make a decision. Is it going to be this one, or are you going to wait for the next idea? Because you have to do something. And it was really hard at first. But week after week, I just kept raising my hand and saying something. And it became a way to just simply choose contribution and choose courage, even when fear and anxiety is present, which has become, one of the cornerstones of how I approach life. And so now I'm actually teaching a class for graduate students who maybe struggle to find their voice. And that's another really important part of how I think about my life and my work, looking for ways to turn something that might have been a struggle or a lesson for me into a way to support others and give back to others.
I love that story. And one of the things I love about it is probably how relatable it is for people that have that sense that even if it's not them, that they can probably think of somebody who says, oh yeah, that person has really great ideas, but they're not sharing them. There can be any number of reasons why. I know my husband's definitely wired that way. He's an elementary school phys ed teacher. elementary, middle school. So when he's around his students, I mean, he is like, super talkative and really high energy and doing silly things. But if he's in like a faculty meeting, even though he trusts and really likes people that he works with, he will very likely be one of the people who is least apt to say something or to contribute. Or if there's a small group conversation with a group of people, depending on who he's with, he might hold himself back because he thinks, well, somebody else probably already has this idea and they're going to say it and they're going to say it better than I will. So I'm just not going to say anything. Or this really isn't all that profound. And I have to sometimes like remind, and I've talked about this publicly before, and that I'm like, you have really great insights. Like he's a very thoughtful person. And sometimes we need to remind people what I call it, and I can send you a bookmark with this on it, I have it on it, is to borrow other people's belief in you. So sometimes we need to borrow people's belief in us when we are experiencing doubt because we maybe can't see what they can see. And so when we make that choice to say, you know what, maybe they're right. Like maybe they're onto something. Maybe I should follow that insight. That can be the thing that starts to activate a sense of courage. And then to your point, as you start practicing it more, and you said I set a rule for myself, you make a commitment, then when it comes up, you're not having to exert energy to make the choice, as much energy, because you've already made the choice ahead of time. It's just a matter of when am I going to do it now?
Yeah, and that works really well for someone like me who is a real rule follower. For a rebel, it might not work as well. I love everything you said. It totally resonates. And also, that's like another goal that I've set for myself, is to be the kind of person who can see in other people what's there but is not fully expressed yet. It's actually one of the greatest joys in life, right? When you can see in someone their potential, but not in a vague way. Like to actually see what they are uniquely capable of contributing. It's such a joy. And as a mentor, that's what I love doing the most. Is to see that seed and be like a gigantic mirror, like a funhouse mirror, amplifying it. I see this in you. I see this in you, until the other person can see it themselves.
Yeah, and it's a powerful thing to do. I think especially now, as so many people are dealing with layoffs, so many people are dealing with really having a hard time at work. And I know there's a woman that is a friend of mine who her entire career had been in ministry spaces and like college ministry. And she was looking to get a job outside of that, maybe like at a nonprofit, and was experiencing doubt of saying, they're going to look at my resume and being like, I only have experience working in ministry. And I said, no, let's take a step back at what skills you needed to be effective at doing that. And then we like pulled out the skills and separated it from the industry and said, do you see, I mean, my goodness, your ability to manage teams and to pivot and to be adaptable and to be flexible and to work with people across all different types of cultures and languages. I mean, how incredibly relevant is that right now? And so sometimes we need those people in our lives, like that remind us of the things that we may not even be aware of, and call that out, you know? So thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that story. I wanted to dig in a little bit. I guess I'm curious about that. What do you think would have been lost? I like to think of, when we mute ourselves, there's always a potential cost or something that's lost when we do that. So if you could go back to that time, what would have been lost in that moment, and then whatever followed it, if you had chosen to not speak up and say anything and contribute?
And there are a lot of moments in my life where I had to choose speaking up or doing something that made me really anxious, where there was some part of me that wanted to just run away and pretend it wasn't happening. In The Joy of Movement, I write about how I almost went home before I auditioned to teach my first class. This was actually before the story that I told you, when I was not yet that skilled at choosing courage over fear. So I can think of it's not just that personality seminar, but it was also auditioning to teach my first class, accepting my first guest lecture to teach a class as a graduate student, teaching my first class as a graduate student on my own. There were a lot of times when I had to say yes because it was consistent with the vision that I had for my life. And that's really, I think, when I think about what the source of my courage has been, it has been the desire to be of service and of value in some way that, at the end of the day, I can feel good about myself. And so that's been the thing that would allow me in that moment to audition to teach or raise my hand and say something in personality seminar. And I think that just the desire to change wouldn't have been enough. Like, I really had to have that sense of, I want to be somebody. Actually, this is what I've always felt, is I always wanted to be somebody who would say something that somebody needed to hear. Like, even as a kid, I remember reading books and having that sort of inner desire. I want to write a book that someday somebody who is scared or sad or alone or in pain, it will make them feel not alone, and it's something they need to hear. And so I guess having that vision means you have to actually start saying things out loud also.
Yeah. So you were choosing to live in alignment with the bigger picture of what you saw for your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I connect to that a lot through the expressive process. I mean, I've wanted to write a book for a long time. I'm finally working on a book proposal right now, because I'm like, I have so many stories about things that have happened in insights learned and conversations and stories of other people that are so inspiring. Like, people are so inspiring. And it's like, if
I know.
really take the time to listen, there's so much insight that people have. And as I think about my own experience of going through that and the things that were held back, I mean, so much of it was, and I want to hear about your audition, sort of like how that went, because I'm somebody who was like terrified of auditioning from a singing perspective. So like I went to an all-girls high school, Catholic high school, and we had a choir that would wear these like long black dresses and pearl necklaces for their performance. And it was a big deal. Like, the choir, they were really amazing. And I loved singing from the time I was like 5 or 6. But if someone was going to put me on the spot and be like, okay, sing to try out for this thing, absolutely. That whole like fear versus excitement thing, I told myself that there was no excitement in any of that. There was just straight up paralysis. And so I didn't. So for all of high school, even though I love singing like by myself, for all of high school, I did not ever try out for the choir because I was just too paralyzed by the thought of having to audition in front of somebody. And I ended up taking voice lessons my senior year because it was a safe bet, because it wasn't performative. It was just like, you're going to learn technical skills with a voice instructor who's going to help you sing better for your audience of no one, because I wasn't performing. So like, why would someone take voice lessons if they're not going to perform? But I ended up having to. They had a year-end recital, and my instructor was like, what song are you going to sing? And I was like, oh, no, I'm not going to be doing that. And she reminded me that all of her students sing a song. So I picked Angel by Sarah McLachlan, which is like one of the most depressing songs on the planet. And that's what I chose to do. And I didn't enjoy that at all. But then finally, after we have these catalytic moments in our lives, and after a semester abroad in southern Spain in college, 12 years later, I came back and tried out for a gospel choir solo because I had this new lease on life as a result of being in a totally different culture that was so vibrant and so expressive and so alive. And so that was when that really began for me. And now I'm writing music and producing music, and it's taken time, but I think all of the opportunities that we hold ourselves back, we're also potentially robbing other people of the opportunity to be encouraged, to feel validated, to learn something, to gain an insight, to gain perspective, because we're so afraid of our own discomfort in the midst of it, but we're potentially causing other people that really need to hear what we have to say or sing or share or create miss out on that.
Oh, I have another story about that.
Yes.
One of the other things that I had, this is going to sound like Kelly's life of fear, but that's kind of what it's like to actually to live in my brain and body. So I had to overcome a fear of flying. And for a long time, I didn't tell people about it because I was so embarrassed. I thought that like I was the only person who had an extreme phobia of flying. I thought it was shameful, like I should have been able to deal with this. It's not rational. And at some point around the time that I was talking about stress and writing the stress book, I started to tiptoe into telling people about it because it was an example of how I had to systematically approach a true phobia and find ways to do something that was extremely stressful but meaningful. So I started to tell those stories, even though I thought it was embarrassing. And I was surprised to find how many people related to it, also shared that fear or had a loved one who shared that fear. And then within about a year or two, I started to get these emails from people who were flying for the first time, because they had heard me talk about my fear of flying and how I'd overcome it. I got an email while I was on a plane from somebody who was flying for their first time in years, to see family they hadn't been able to see because they had worked through my story about overcoming my fear of flying from the stress book with her therapist. And I feel like that's another example of that too. If I'd let myself sit too much in my shame or embarrassment about that and had not spoken about it, that my courage would not have been contagious either. And also, you said you wanted to talk about making meaning. I wouldn't have a story to tell that involves being able to transform something that was very difficult for me and had some shame involved in it too, into a story of being able to help others. That sometimes when we keep things in ourselves, we also are robbing ourselves, not just of the change that we experience, but that full cycle that happens when we're a little bit more transparent and a little bit more vulnerable. We're more likely to also see the positive ripple effects that we have on others.
It's so true. And I think once it can be scary to do that the very first time, especially. It can stay scary beyond that. But I think back to several years ago, I was in corporate for 13 years. I was the director of well-being for a benefits consulting firm. And in the midst of that, I burned out, I got Epstein-Barr virus, and at 32 was very sick. As the director of well-being, who 2 years earlier had been named the #1 health promotion professional in the United States, he was very much not well. And I was so afraid of losing my image of this wellness person. And I was so terrified that if anybody realized that I was actually grossly incompetent in some areas of my own well-being, that they would judge me. Mm-hmm. And I started sharing, this was in 2017, I started sharing more vulnerably about my own journey with burnout. And I got some pushback. Some people at my company were like, she's the wellness person. Why is she talking about burning out? And I thought...
This happens to me all the time when I'm invited to come in and talk to folks about stress. They're like, but keep it light. I'm like, what do you mean keep it light? Don't talk about anything that's actually stressful. I'm like, okay, you mean life? What? It is kind of funny, right? Anyways, please go ahead.
But it's true. It's how we have to get to the... I can just talk about drink a kale shake, even though I'm a health coach or whatever. I'm not going to... I had been so focused on physical health, which is still very important. I mean, it's where I started, right? Of going through my own physical healing with food and other things and getting rid of health issues I had my whole life. But I started to realize, oh my gosh, the social emotional thing is perhaps the most important thing, that if we don't get that together, then these other things are going to feel impossible for people to access. And so by starting to talk about it honestly, I was really initially shocked by how receptive people were, because I wasn't on a pedestal anymore. It was when you show up as relatable and accessible and approachable, it's pretty amazing how people then can say, oh my gosh, I see myself in you. So now I feel connected and now I trust you, because you're not coming at this from just theory. You've actually lived this stuff, Mm-hmm. So speaking of stress, I think one of the things that I love, your definition of stress, stress is what arises when something we care about is at stake.
Yes.
Right?
You got it.
I quote you all the time. I'm serious about this. I know I'm probably having a fangirling moment, but truly I share that constantly with people, quoting you, because I love that definition of stress. And I've seen how it's really resonated with other people who have such guilt and shame of seeing it as a weakness or a form of incompetence, when that's not what it is. So I'm curious, how did you arrive at that definition of stress, and how can we begin to shift our perspective around it to not be so heels dug in, resistant to it, but to really learn from it?
I mean, part of it's scientific and part of it's pragmatic. So the original scientific definition of stress from Hans Selye was anything in life that requires you to adapt or respond. And he had this theory that also it would trigger a response in your body that was toxic and harmful. And that's why life, when it's stressful, is toxic and harmful, and you're doomed. This was the original theory of stress. And yet when you actually look at the science of stress, even what Hans Selye was looking at, we're really talking about stuff that's happening inside of you. Hormonal changes, physical changes, thoughts, emotions, drives, motivations, things that arise when life is asking you to adapt or respond. And also, a lot of that stuff is helpful, right? It's not universally toxic and harmful. So I shifted my definition of stress to focus on the internal, because basically that's really what modern science does. When we talk about stress, we're talking about a stress response rather than stressors in life, the circumstances that might give rise to stress. Because I think all of us can agree, poverty, good or bad, not good, right? Grief, good or bad, not good. And so when we focus on the things outside of ourselves that can sometimes cause stress or that do cause stress, we can get hung up in this idea of, do I want this or not? Do I want to prevent this for other people or not? But when we shift our focus to stress as being what arises in you in a moment that matters, when something that you care about is at stake, it's a lot easier to get to the place where we can have a mindset that is both appreciative and practical. So what's arising in me in this moment of difficulty is I'm really focused on who and what I care about. What's happening for me is my body is trying to give me energy to act. What's happening in me is my mind is laser focused on this because I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm trying to move forward, and I'm trying to make meaning, and I'm trying to avoid future suffering. And all the stuff that's going on, we can experience it as symptoms of stress, but we can also experience it as our body and our brain trying to help us, even if it's not always comfortable. And it forces us to engage in ways that can be very difficult. But so that definition of stress being what arises in your body and brain when something you care about is at stake, it also allows us to focus on the strengths that humans have for coping with pain and suffering and loss and change. And we have a lot of resources, and it's not all toxic, right? We have, as part of our stress response system, the ability for courage, the desire to reach out for others, the ability and willingness to ask for help. We have the ability to reflect and learn. We have the ability to grow. We have the ability to focus and rise to the challenge. And we can leverage these strengths as part of how we cope with life. So for me, this definition is all about choosing a mindset that lets us choose life when life is hard and when you cannot just avoid stress, which is really what it comes down to. You know, if you define stress as a toxic state that makes you the worst version of yourself, every time life is stressful and you feel stress, there's also the story in your head that says, I can't handle this, this is too much, my life is screwed up. Sometimes stories like, I'm the only one who's stressed like this is gonna end badly. And all of those thoughts about stress, they're just, it's piling on stuff that is not helpful. So I want to help people think about stress in a way that lets them choose life and move forward and engage.
I love that. And just for anyone who wasn't here at the beginning joining us, a lot of these insights can be found in Kelly's book called The Upside of Stress. Highly, highly recommend. We're going to do a raffle at the end. But I think one of the things for that, like there's a meaning-making aspect associated with that. And I think about the journey of when I went through burnout. I was very much somebody who was super independent. My parents are both entrepreneurs. So I grew up in an environment where it's just like, you figure it out. You know, you figure it out and you take care of yourself. And I was not somebody who was very open about my needs if I felt like I was being needy in some way or insufficient or had a deficiency of some kind or was incapable or incompetent of, doing something. I was so hesitant to speak up and let anyone know I was struggling. And when I burned out, got mono and lost my voice and was sleeping 12 hours a night for months and not feeling rested and was supposed to be the Energizer Bunny wellness person at the same time, which felt very much like an impossibility. I remember going through that, and one of the greatest gifts of that season of my life was what it taught me about leaning on other people and reaching out to other people and asking other people for support, and then most importantly, being willing to receive it.
I relate. I know. Yeah, it's so funny. So if people have seen my TED Talk, since so many people have, they might remember that in that talk, I focus on the benefits of helping others when you're stressed. And it's so funny because it's a little bit of a blind spot that I had 10 years ago. And it's taken a lot of stress in my own life to also have the other part of the story. just how important it is to be able to accept help too. So just sort of in a nutshell, there's all this great science that when you're stressed out, when you're going through something difficult, if you're able to help others, it makes you more resilient. It leads to better mental health outcomes. It leads to more hope. It's a great thing to be able to do. So in my TED Talk, I was really focused on sharing this amazing science that when you're stressed, it can actually motivate you to help others. You receive resilience as a result, and it can help you stay healthier and more engaged with your life. But what you said is the other side of the story too, that life requires interdependence, not only helping others, but recognizing when you're the one who needs support. And it can be in the very same circumstance. You know, there's a lot of life challenges where you can both be a resource to others and at the same time need to ask for support and help yourself. And that the ability to find that balance is super important. And I'm trying to emphasize that more now. Yeah.
Well,
and I'm trying to do it also.
Like, not just talk about it, but actually practice it.
I know.
It's like, it can be hard, but it's like, you know, when we're doing that, I found, I don't know, I'm curious if you found this to be true, kind of like with practicing courage, that it has this contagion effect and you can start to feel more confident about doing it. I find that I tell people, I'm like, I'm really good at asking for help now. Like, I've had to learn the very hard way multiple times, unfortunately, like getting hit by a truck, dealing with mono, that I've had to learn the hard way to ask for help at times where I have been like literally completely incapacitated.
Yeah.
Like, not by choice. And to see what a gift it is to somebody else to be able to be a contribution. There's a book called The Art of Possibility by Benjamin Zander. I don't know if you're familiar with this book. It's a beautiful book. He and his wife, Rosamund Zander, wrote it. And one of the things they talk about is asking yourself the question, how can I be a contribution? Yeah. And when I thought of, I remember when I was after this car accident, I was hit by a truck. I had a T12 compression fracture in my back, May of the pandemic. So it was like really a stellar year. And I was laying in the trauma room in the hospital, and I thought to myself, between being like very scared and very sad and very angry, I also thought to myself, there's something here about rising up when we get knocked down that I'm going to use. And so like 5 months later, I was doing a keynote called I'm Still Standing, Rising Up with Resilience When Life Knocks You Down. like, I'm going to use this. And I had former coworkers that, you know, stopped by to deliver gifts and meals and stuff during that time. And one of them said, she's like, no, I don't want you to take this the wrong way. But if this happened to somebody else, they might have just kind of like wallowed in the misery of it. But like, you're actually going to do something with this. So, you know, sort of be encouraged by that. And it's true. It's when we look for the meaning in the midst of adversity.
Yeah. This is actually, it's a coping instinct. So first of all, we are capable of learning and growing and turning suffering into meaning. That's a human capacity. But it also is an instinct to help us avoid a defeat response, the biological response that can lead us to actually choose to give up on life when life is extremely stressful or we experience a great deal of loss. And so, you know, this that you could be sitting there in a moment of pain and think, I'm going to turn this into something. It's both true, and it can be like a unique attribute, part of who you are, but also it's a human instinct to choose life. And I think some people are a little dismissive of it, but I feel like if you feel that instinct arising in you, tell yourself you don't have to figure it out now. It actually is a wonderful thing. It's a kind of a self-trust that you have a vision of your life where you believe at some point you will be able to use the experience you're going through now to in service of something that matters to you. And if you have that self-belief to really to appreciate it and savor it, and you don't have to rush figuring out how it's going to happen. I was giving a talk a few years ago, more than a few years ago now, and a woman told the story that I've often thought about in terms of this instinct we have and how valuable it is. And it was a woman who had been in an abusive relationship, and she had found the ability and the willingness to finally leave, and she had to go to a shelter. And she was so overwhelmed going into the shelter, not knowing how this was going to work out, if she was going to be safe. And as she was checking in, a woman put her hand on her shoulder and said, I just want to tell you that you're going to get through this. And I know because I've been where you are. So what the woman who was telling me the story said is, first of all, that was very helpful to have the woman say that to her. But she said, in that moment, I had a flash. She had a future memory and this utter conviction that someday she was going to be that woman. And she was going to be putting her hand on another person's shoulder and saying, you're going to be able to get through this. And I know because I've been there. And I think about how amazing it is that she had that future memory kick in that moment that allowed her to have a sense of a possible future to move toward. And I think like it's not, it's not being psychic. It is a human instinct to believe that you are going to be able to move forward and make meaning. And it's to value that and trust that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It reminds me of what happened. Interestingly, I had a therapist. I see a somatic therapist who, does a lot of mind-body integrative work that's been helping me through the PTSD from this accident. And she was asking me, she said, when did you know you were going to be okay? After I said, when did you know you were okay? And I thought back to when I was in the trauma room, there was a nurse practitioner who came in right after I got the diagnosis I had fracture from a radiologist who had no bedside manner to speak of. And she comes in, she's a nurse PA who was in neurology. And she comes in and she's like, what's going on, And I'm thinking to myself, fairly obvious as to why I'm upset. Like I'm laying on a stretcher in a trauma room with a back fracture. Like this is not what I planned my day to look like. And she said, oh, you're going to be okay. That's like the best kind of fracture to have. And I'm like, okay, do tell. And she starts to share with me a story of how years before she had gotten sick all of a sudden. She was in her early 20s and she got sick and she would, be like vomiting and nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. And it turns out she had lesions on her brain. She had to get the lesions removed. And she had to relearn at like age 21, 22, she had to relearn how to walk. Several months after she was in, getting care for a good year from this, she's walking to her aunt's house for a 4th of July picnic or something, gets hit by a motorcyclist, hit and run. And fortunately didn't break anything, no major damage, went to the ER just to get checked out. And she said, I keep ending up in the hospital. Maybe there's something here. Maybe there's something here I'm supposed to do in healthcare. And so she decided to study neurology. And so now she helps people and supports them in those spaces. And when she told me her story and when she said, you're going to be okay, I believed her because I was like, I don't think I'm going to have to relearn how to walk. So I think I'm going to be all right. And sometimes in those moments of what could otherwise be despair, the word of encouragement from one other person that gets it can be the thing that makes the difference.
Yeah. There's something so powerful too about that example of having to learn how to walk again. I realized after I finished The Joy of Movement, there were like 3 or 4 stories about people learning to walk again after stroke, after paralysis, after open heart surgery. And I hadn't done it intentionally, but I realized that, of course, we hear it as a metaphor as well. It's a physical challenge, but it's also the most literal challenge to find a way to put one foot in front of the other when it feels like you can't. Yeah. And it's one of the reasons why I shared those stories, because I think we hear stories and sometimes the physical lands for us at a level that the abstract doesn't as much.
Yeah. It's true. And Janine wrote here in the comments, right, that one day, I forget who, it's a quote from originally, but right, one day the struggles you've overcome will, and share will be someone else's survival guide. And, I think that's a really helpful thing to keep in mind. I think it's important we let ourselves grieve and be upset and experience all the emotions that we need to experience to get to that place. Because I think sometimes you're like, oh, just make meaning of it. I can still make meaning and be mad and frustrated and grieving and all. It's like an and.
The science shows there's a positive correlation between post-traumatic suffering and post-traumatic growth. There's not the bypass option. Yeah. Right. That it is the literal fact that you are suffering so much that activates the instinct to grow. Yeah. It's hard. That doesn't make it easy, but I think it's sometimes helpful to remember that it's that in the midst of the suffering, that it is also activating the strengths and the instincts that will ultimately someday allow you to as someone shared, to be someone else's survival guide.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to think we're gonna let you go to honor your time and commitment here. I'm going to stay on, folks. So we're going to stay on for another 15 minutes. I'm going to talk about some of this stuff a bit more, and just also see if there's any other questions. We'll do a raffle. So if you haven't already, put the hashtag unmuted in the chat, and we'll make sure that you get put into the raffle to either get the joy of movement. And I'll share some insights from that book of some things that I read that I thought were interesting and helpful. And then we'll be also raffling off a copy of The Upside of Stress. Like, my microphone's in the way. So I just wanted to say, Kelly, thank you so much for being here. We're going to drop your link, social links in the comments. Where can people follow you and continue to learn more from you?
Yeah, if someone wants to reach out, Instagram is a pretty good way, and kellymcgonigal.com for all of my stuff.
All your stuff. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, for having this conversation today. Really, really appreciate your presence and your time and your insights, and continue doing what you do, because I'm going to keep buying your books and telling people about it. And I'm very grateful to be able to spend time with you today. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone who joined us.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, everybody. Well, I'm going to stay on here and I'm going to continue to talk about some of these things. One of the things that I love about Kelly's book, The Joy of Movement, and we're going to do a raffle, like I said. So hang on, because we're going to do the raffle in about 5 minutes or so, 5 to 7 minutes, we'll do the raffle. Something that I love about her book, The Joy of Movement, is the tagline of it is how exercise helps us find happiness, hope, connection, and courage. And when I think about my own journey, I know for a lot of my life, I was an athlete, and I played soccer, I played softball. And as I got into adulthood, there was sort of like this total disconnection. And it was one of the ways I muted my body, was feeling completely disconnected from a form of movement or exercise that wasn't like running on a treadmill or going on an elliptical, which at the time really didn't do a whole lot for me. And several years ago, there was a class that combines sort of like modern dance with martial arts poses, some yoga poses. It's called NIA, N-I-A. And it was something that I started taking, that and Zumba. I loved Zumba classes, like anything that was a form of dance, to really fun music. There's also evidence that shows that when we're listening to music that brings us a lot of joy, that can actually help us increase our ability to stay with and exercise longer than we otherwise would. So power of music. And I've just found that to be the case of connecting to freedom in my body and using movement as a way to find joy, to be unmuted. When we feel unmuted in our bodies and in our sense of movement and having freedom of movement, it activates. There's a connection, right? When we move the body, we move the brain. There's a connection between these two things. And so if you're feeling stuck mentally or emotionally, is anyone feeling stuck? You can just drop in the chat like been there, or just type in the word stuck. That when we're feeling stuck in some way, mentally, emotionally, or relationally, sometimes, and there can be this connection between feeling stuck that way and actually feeling stuck in our bodies. And so one of the things that we can do is we can move the body to move the brain. Move your body to move your brain. A lot of you mentioned you like going on walks, walking with your dog, walking outside, yoga, dance, all ways to do that. So I would invite you to just notice that about yourself, right? When you're coming to that place of feeling stuck, ask yourself, when is the last time that I moved my body in a way that felt free, that felt energizing, that in some way even challenged me? Been there, love that. Lots of been there's. All right. Cheryl, Ben, and Michelle, and Jenny, and Tom, and Karen, and Mary, I see you. Stephanie, I see you. So to think about, what is a form of movement that I would enjoy doing? So for me, I'm curious if there's any Pelotoners here. My Peloton handle is @unmutedlife, if there's any Pelotoners in here. And I find that I intentionally pick classes that have music that I love. So basically 90s hip hop or 2000s music I love, or Motown or gospel music. I love when I'm doing a workout to those classes, to those soundtracks. I don't feel like I'm like working out. I feel like I'm doing something that I genuinely enjoy, even though I'm sweating and my heart's racing and it's challenging. So it's a both and. I'm curious, what are some music? And I will put this on a playlist. That's my commitment to you as a follow-up for people that put these in the chat. What is a song that when you're listening to that song, it just brings you joy and energy and life? My commitment after this session is I'm going to put those songs in a playlist, and I'm going to share it with all of you in this community in the comments afterwards. So fellow 90s hip hop fan, thank you, Janine, for bringing attention to this. So what is a song that brings you joy? Maybe it's something you like to run to or move to or walk to or just have your own dance party to in your house. What is a song that brings you joy? I know there's, like some of the ones that I love are like, Walking on Sunshine is one that you can't help but as you're listening to it, feel totally revved up by. Love it. Tom says Rocky, Eye of the Tiger. Just saw Creed 3 this weekend, by the way. Awesome. Pump It. Hey, Kara. Pump It Louder by Black Eyed Peas. Yes, that is a jam. 1999 by Prince. Milestones by Shook. I'm learning some new songs. Hey, Alyssa. Macklemore, Ceiling Can't Hold Us. Oh, that's a good one. Go Big or Go Home. So yeah, drop in some of your songs. Thriller by Michael Jackson. Joy by King and Country. Oh, I love that song, Veda. It is such, the beat to that song is so like, you have to move. Ain't a Mountain High Enough by Marvin Gaye. Yes. The Rocky soundtrack entirely. Sunshine in My Pocket by Timberlake. Amy, awesome. Well, connect with me on there. Again, it's at Unmuted Life. We'll connect. I'm a big fan of Cody Rigsby, among others. Shake It Off by Taylor Swift is a fun one. So thinking through, like, just put on some music and let your body move. You can pull all the shades. You can shut the door. You can set a timer for 5 minutes and just put on a song and move your body the way that it would move if you were 5 years old and you weren't judging yourself. And just see what happens. Rainbow Connection, Anything by Pitbull, Fight Song by Rachel Platten, Madonna, Holiday, and Like a Virgin. The Sound of Sunshine? Michael Franti. Michael Franti's music is is just fun. It's a good time. So thinking through, like, what can I do to make this something that I look forward to? Something that I want to be a part of. Sia, Unstoppable. Oh, that's a good one. That is a good one. Footloose. Oh my gosh. Yes. Hey Ya by Outkast. Yes, all of these things, right? And I'm seriously going to put all these in a playlist. So any songs you drop in the chat, I am going to, that we're gonna mention. And my mom is here. I'm so sorry we communicated that you needed to figure it out. Wish I could have gotten more curious as to help you when you were going through life difficulties. Well, here's the cool thing about that. My parents and I are really close. And the gift about all of this is even if there's something that didn't go the way that we wanted to at some point in our life, whether it's our childhood or some other point in our life, the fact that we can as adults have a conversation and acknowledge it, not out of judgment, but just to acknowledge and say, yeah, I wish things would be different, but guess what? We can't undo what happened in the past. But, we do have the ability to do. We have the ability to decide what the future looks like. And we can say, how can we be more connected going forward? Or what are ways that we can be supportive of each other going forward? And so my mom and I are planning a spa day later this month. And we're going to take a half day and go to lunch and go to the spa together. And it's like, we get to have more conversations now as adults that maybe I didn't have as a kid. But you know what? It's better to have it as an adult than never have it at all. So, Mom, I just want to acknowledge that. I love the idea of a playlist. Deborah, I'm serious. I'm going to drop it in the chat. I will send anybody who drops a song in here, I will send you a copy of the playlist through the messenger on here. Rule the World, Isaac Bello. That's her son. Amazing. So what I want to do is I want to make sure, and I love Tom says here, as adults, we're in the driver's seat of our own lives. We're the authors of our present and future realities. Don't waste your gifts with the world. I feel like that's a good takeaway from today's experience, right? Whether we're expressing the joy of creative expression, the joy of movement, whether we're connecting to something that at one point brought us an experience of fear or anxiety, and then we've chosen to move through it or make meaning out of it, right? Like we get to choose how we show up. Couple other songs, Macklemore, Can't Hold Us, Cake by the Ocean, Party Rock Anthem, Who Runs the World, Girls, Let's Get Loud. I love that one. Don't Worry, Be Happy, Shake Your Groove Thing. Oh my gosh, this is going to be a fun playlist, y'all. This is going to have like 30 songs on it. Let's do a raffle. We're going to do raffle for 3 of Kelly's book, for 3 raffles for these 2 books. And here's how it's going to work. If you get picked, we're going to put the raffle on the screen. If you get picked, you have to, wrong book. Thanks for the feedback. That was something else I was doing today about workplace culture. The Upside of Stress or The Joy of Movement. So if your name gets selected, send me a LinkedIn message that says, I won, and tell me which book you want, either stress or movement. You can just give me one word. So we're going to do a raffle right now. Put the hashtag unmuted. If you have not put the hashtag unmuted in the chat, drop it in there. Janine, you're so kind to put my song Somebody as a mood booster for your playlist. Turn down for what? Love is a battlefield. Yes. Walking on broken glass. That's Mary's song for Annie Lennox. Follow Your Arrow, Casey Musgraves. Just bust a move. Love it. All right. We've got 62 entries. If you haven't already dropped hashtag unmuted in the chat, drop it in there. Drop it in there and we will include you. All right. I'm going to give you 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's do a drawing, Tim, and see who wins. See who wins. You see your name up there. Isn't this fun, y'all? Isn't this a fun little thing that we do? Who's it gonna be? Tammy Foreman, you are a winner of one of our books. Congratulations. Send me a LinkedIn message that says movement or stress. Message me on LinkedIn, direct message me, and I will make sure that we get your address and we send it to you. Let's do another one. Let's do another one, Tim. Let's see who else. So we've got Tammy Foreman. And now we've got our second winner of one of the two books, The Joy of Movement or The Upside of Stress, Sarah Patterson. Woo! Congratulations, Sarah. Congratulations. Send me a message. Which book you want, we'll send it to you. And let's just third time's a charm. If you haven't already dropped hashtag Amina, there we go. So close, Janine. I know. So close. I don't know who it's going to be either. I'm sitting here. Alyssa Bello. So glad that you could join us today with her sweet little son, Isaac, in there. Alyssa, you won one of the books too. You have my number, Alyssa. So you can text me and we'll get you one of those books sent to you. So Movement or Upside of Stress. Y'all, I want to give you a couple updates. I want to just say thank you for being here today. If you haven't already dropped in your song in the playlist, drop it in. Couple last things I want to mention. Thank you all so much for your support of my song. It's been streamed over 7,000 times already. Somebody has been streamed over 7,000 times, which is just like, what? Mind-blowing and amazing. Mind-blowing and amazing. So cool. So thank you. We wrapped up the lyrics for the second song on Friday. So now we're working on production. Or 2 weeks ago, we wrapped up the lyrics and now we're working on production of the song and instruments. And we're going to have maybe a little choir in there. It's going to be some cool stuff. I'm very excited about it. So this spring, that song should be released hopefully by like May. So anyway, stay tuned, pun intended on that. And our next guest on the next show is going to be my co-creator, Leroy Hyson, who is the person, my producer and the musician behind the music. So you're not going to want to miss that episode. It's going to be in 2 weeks on March 20th at noon Eastern time. And it's going to be a really fun conversation. So I just want to say, everybody, thank you so much. Tom, being here always makes me feel like a winner. Tom, you're a winner because you're so kind and you're so thoughtful and you're focused on impact. And you just show up in a way that makes people feel like they matter. So I want to acknowledge that and thank you for that. And just thank you everybody for being here today. Alyssa and Tom and Veda and Sarah and Mary and Jenny and Janine and Kara and Jerry and Robin and Patty and Vicky and Kim and Karen and everybody, Amy, Jenny, Michelle. I know I'm going to miss somebody. Cindy, just thank you all. Lisa, Linda, Stephanie, Deborah, for being here today. Such a joy. I hope this was you got some insights today about ways to reframe stress, ways to make meaning, and that you're feeling revved up and energized to go forward in your week in a way that's more intentional and thoughtful and purposeful. So thank you all so much for being here. Wonderful being with you. I'm grateful that all of you show up the way that you do. It brings me so much joy. So thank you all so much. And with that, we're going to send you off. So have a great rest of your week. And remember, you are somebody.